the other account, the Desert Demons got me.
Oh man. Well, here's
Oh,
the
is his
thing. Like,
name? Wait, what's his username?
A Train. I messaged him.
Uh,
He said, like,
yeah.
yes, coming. Oh, that's okay. Yeah, this is the layout. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
see? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. How you doing, man?
Yo, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Just give me a moment. Hear from
No
you.
worries.
Oh, if you can. Oh wait, my camera is it on? Oh wait.
The host can probably.
Going back to 505.
Hello, hello. Can you hear
Howdy.
me?
Yes, we can.
Good. Give me a moment.
One thing I will say is keep. I don't personally care about this, but TikTok hates me. So keep all forms of profanity to not. I don't even want a minimum, if at all possible, absolute zero. Just simply because TikTok hates me. They got people watching my account, and someone said something, and I'm just gone yet again. So last time I think I got banned because I was making fun of a certain nationality. Uh, they were the ones who used to own Americans, so it wasn't even like a small one. It was yeah, it was the Boston Tea Party people. I said something and they took me down. I was like, bro, that's not even. They don't even like themselves, but whatever.
Right, right. All right, yeah, don't worry. I'm a good Christian, so I'm not gonna curse.
Oh, a good Christian. Oh, okay, okay. Relax on that comment. Jesus will humble you. Relax, buddy.
Oh, okay. Oh man, if you want, I can. So usually on my lives, and host, it's up to you. I turn off gifts just because, like, I don't want I want people paying attention. We don't have to do that, but whatever. Or like the comment section, at least during the debate. Either one of
Right.
those.
I'm gonna keep it reasonable. Raw, I trust you. Don't go crazy with it. Any sort of like actual blasphemy or racism, just mute them. Because I'm not gonna be comment watching like that. I'm gonna have my phone pointed at my computer for the timer, and then because I don't want to be sitting here have to be at attention the entire live. Um, so
Okay. We didn't decide, by the way, on who's like making the first opening statement. So like,
I don't mind. You want to go first? It's up to you.
I can
okay,
do a coin. I can do a coin toss. Y'all can decide. It is what it is. How y'all want to do it?
I don't mind. If you want to go first.
I'll do it. It's fine.
Okay. So the way that this is going to work is 90 minutes. It probably won't take the whole 90 minutes. But we got introduction for 5 minutes. Do we need a 5 minute introduction? We don't
It's
even
not
need a
going to take
5
you
minute.
five.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
not going to take you
yeah.
5 minutes. Like,
I'm just gonna read straight off this, so just so I don't have to think about it myself. We do a
yeah.
5 minute introduction. Then me, the moderator, I'm going to introduce the debate topic, the participants, and the format, which I'm currently doing now. Opening statements will be 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Opponent one will be 2 minutes, or they'll present their position. Then opponent two will present their position. The first round will be affirmative cases, 15 minutes. It'll be the first person who establishes it'll be reconstructionist who establishes the historical evidence for Jesus' resurrection, and then the opposition, which is A Train, who offers the rebuttal. The second round will be A Train presenting their case against the resurrection for 10 minutes, and then Reconstructionists will reply to that for 5 minutes. We'll have cross examination for 20 minutes. Both participants will ask for have 10 minutes on the clock. Third round is clarifications and additional arguments, 20 minutes total. Both parties will have 10 minutes. Closing statements will be 10 minutes. And then closing statements will be 10 minutes, and each opponent will have five. And then we'll have Q&A moderated for 5 minutes. We might go a little bit over, and that is when the moderator or the audience, if applicable, ask any final questions for clarification or deeper insight. Has anybody got any problems with this?
I'm not gonna lie.
Hope
I don't
not.
remember all of that. So if you could perhaps,
What was that?
I didn't remember every single thing you said. So perhaps.
Oh, it's fine. I got the message in front of me, so I'll make sure to keep up with the times. I don't know why my layout just changed.
Also, I'm not sure if people can see the topic as well.
No, it doesn't matter. Like I'm just gonna be hosting the. I'm just gonna be showing a timer. Why is it doing this? Okay, let's do this. So boom, that's good enough. And then I'm going to turn my camera around. And then I'm going to take off as soon as I pull up a clock. Am I on 96 hours on my clock app? What the heck? All right, now I gotta. You think after 2 years of using TikTok, I know how to use it better, right?
Right.
There we go. Alrighty, so for the first one, we got introductions. Just do 2.5 minutes most. Probably don't need more than that, right?
No.
Yeah, sure.
I'll just let you
Let's
know.
just stopwatch.
Yeah.
What in the heck? Alrighty, you're good to go, Reconstructionist.
All right. I am the Reconstructionist, reconstructing the Christian faith while preventing the spread of biblical misinformation, placing reason over consensus, because truth ain't determined by a head count. So, today, good evening. Today, we'll present the case that Jesus of Nazareth was raised from the dead based on historical and philosophical evidence. The resurrection is the central claim of Christianity, and I will demonstrate why this is the most plausible explanation for the events surrounding Jesus' death. I'll focus on multiple attestations, the empty tomb, the transformation of the disciples, and other crucial points of evidence that support this conclusion. I want to say for my opponent here, A-Train, I do love you. I want you to come to the saving grace of Jesus Christ. And sometimes that has to come at the expense of getting your worldview destroyed. What my opponent will not be able to do is give an alternative explanation. He won't be able to do it. He won't be able to give something that actually makes sense, alternatively to the resurrection claim. Additionally, what he will be left with is to say, well, there's not that there isn't evidence for the resurrection, it's just not convincing to me, which I'm fine with that. I don't care if it doesn't make sense to him. I just care that it's logical, and so should he. And hopefully he sees that throughout this debate. With that being said, let's have a good debate. I'll end there.
Okay. All right.
Alrighty, whenever you start, I'll start the timer.
Okay, yeah, so I do want to thank my opponent, the Reconstructionist, coming on and debating me. I think it's going to be hopefully a fruitful debate. And of course, I'm going to represent my case against the resurrection and why I don't believe it's an actual applicable explanation at all whatsoever, especially for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I'm going to provide what I believe them facts of may be and why, even with these facts, it does not provide an explanation as to how the resurrection could have occurred. I'm going to show how there's no evidence. I'm going to show alternative explanations, even in the worldview. And regardless, I'm going to exemplify the circular reasoning that's involved in my opponent's worldview that doesn't actually work out, and it's actually very false, and it actually doesn't, and it's not coherent either. I have all the facts. I have multiple sources as well from other people who have told multiple things, and I'm going to represent them in this debate and hopefully convince my opponent that the resurrection is not true at all and cannot be explained. That's it.
Alrighty, sounds good. So that was the introductions. We can move right into the opening statements. And in the opening statements, we're just going to present your position briefly and mention the key points you'll be addressing. We kind of just did that, no?
Yeah. So for this, what is it? This is the first round, isn't it? Or are we?
Well, that was just the introduction. So, I mean,
okay. Yeah. That was my opening statement.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that was that your opening remarks as well, A-Train?
Yeah.
Alrighty, then we can move right into the first round. It'll be 10 minutes on the clock. Oh, thank God, there's already one. Alrighty, so we got 10 minutes on the clock for Reconstructionists to go first. And then after the 10 minutes are up, A-Train will, let me read it over again. Will be able to offer their rebuttal to the case, and then it'll be flipped. A-Train will give his 10 minutes, and then Reconstruction will give his 5 minutes. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
Alrighty, whenever you start, I'll start the timer. Mr. Reconstructionist.
So historians use a number of criteria to determine whether or not like an event happened, like the trustworthiness or the reliability of a document. One of those is the criteria of authenticity. So it starts with multiple attestation. The resurrection is attested in multiple independent sources, including the four gospels, Paul's letters, and other early Christian texts. We know that this is what they believed from the early start. Each provide different perspectives indicating that they weren't copied but are independent accounts. This strengthens the historical reliability of the resurrection claim. Second, embarrassment. It's noteworthy that women were the first witnesses to the empty tomb. In ancient Jewish culture, women were not considered reliable witnesses. If the resurrection story were fabricated, which we'll get into later, it's unlikely that the early Christians would invent a detail that undermined their credibility. So, like, if this was just a fabrication, it doesn't make any sense that women would be the first ones to actually see him, and for a lot of other reasons we will get into. So dissimilarity, the idea of a bodily resurrection was not a common belief in Jewish or pagan cultures at the time. So for the Jewish culture, they believed in a resurrection of the dead, but that was much later, right? That was in the future. But Jesus' resurrection goes against both Jewish and Roman expectations, suggesting that the account was not simply invented, but reflected a real event. Coherence. The resurrection fits coherently with other historical facts, such as Jesus' crucifixion, burial, and the dramatic transformation of his followers from fearful individuals into bold preachers willing to face martyrdom for their belief in the risen Jesus. It's worth noting right now, because I know I'm going to finish this way before that 10 minutes. It's worth noting right now that everything I'm saying, all the facts that I'm lining up, are only the facts agreed to by both secular and non-secular historians. Both secular and non-secular historians at least agree to these facts. My conclusion based on these facts is that Jesus actually rose from the dead. Continuing. Contextual credibility. The resurrection accounts fit into the broader culture and historical context of first century Palestine, where there was a belief in the resurrection of the dead in the future, yet the claim of Jesus' immediate resurrection was revolutionary. So here are some key historical facts to emphasize. So Jesus' crucifixion and burial in a tomb are widely accepted by scholars. The empty tomb, the disciples' genuine belief in the risen Jesus, and the conversion of skeptics like James and Paul. Furthermore, this message was spread especially in Jerusalem, where Jesus had died prior. Here, Jesus had repeated confrontations with religious leaders who could not disprove what the apostles and 500 witnesses were saying, even though they had the means and the motive to do so. So people with the means and the motive to do so could not disprove the resurrection, which doesn't make any sense. So all of this has to be accounted for. Let's see. Yeah, for now, I'll end there.
You sure? You got a whole 6.5 minutes left on the clock. Actually, 7 minutes.
Well, the last thing I'll say is that plurality of fact only leads to one conclusion, that Jesus rose from the dead. There are naturalistic explanations that try and make sense of this, but those have also been woefully, gleefully from our standpoint, debunked by not even theists, but skeptics. But I assume that we're going to get into that like a little bit later, and I kind of want to hear what his rebuttal is going to be first. So yeah, I'll end there. I think that's good enough.
Alrighty, sounds good. So we got a concession of 6.5 minutes. I don't really have to restart the timer because 6 minutes. I'll just end it at 1:19. So, Mr. A Train, you will have a good 1 second. You'll have 5 minutes to offer your rebuttal to the case that he has presented. Whenever you start talking, I will start the clock.
Okay, so my opponent brought up a bunch of claims. Unfortunately, many of them were baseless. So I kind of want to start with some things. He mentioned that secular scholars as well as religious scholars agree on some of the facts of the resurrection, which he claims, when in fact that's not particularly true. I'll give some of the facts which I could say that I could agree upon, and exactly why this still wouldn't lead to the fact that the resurrection is true or that Jesus rose from the dead. And I'm going to give you the exact claims. So number one, you can posit that many historians as well as scholars agree that Jesus existed. A man a couple millennia ago called Jesus existed and taught an ethical code for his followers. We can perhaps agree with that. The second we can agree on is he got into a dispute with the Roman authorities. The third is he was killed by crucifixion. And the fourth is groups of people claim to have seen him. Those are the only 4 facts which we can agree upon. And again, nothing mentions about an empty tomb. That's a presupposition. It's a baseless assertion that there was an empty tomb. And of course, that there must have been a resurrection. Those are the only 4 facts. And of course, again, in rebuttal, there could be many other responses to this as well. Again, as I said, it was a presupposition also that he was even buried in a tomb. Again, we don't know that for sure, that he was buried in a tomb. This is another assertion that doesn't have any evidence behind it. Again, presupposing that Joseph of Arimathea took Jesus to an empty tomb and sat him there to, and then he rose from the dead on the 3rd day. These are more baseless assertions by my opponent that don't have any evidence for it, and it's a lie that scholars have agreed on these facts as well. It's not actually true. Again, we can also look, something else which I was bringing on as well was the fact that even within the Gospels, again, the Gospels is the only evidence. It's circular reasoning because Gospels are the only evidence that are there that, well, I characterize it as evidence, but it's the only claims that make of the resurrection is from biblical sources. And so again, if we look at the Gospels of John, Mark, Matthew, as well as Luke, we can see internal contradictions. And when something is the word of God, we'd expect there not to be we'd not expect it to be many internal contradictions. It's very fallacious to the fact that it would be true, especially if it's the word of God. That's like something that should be very put together. And I'm going to get into it later, the specifics, exactly the different differences that, and go into the text as well, and the different differences that show that what my opponent is saying is fallacious, and that even the biblical sources themselves don't corroborate in a way that's effective or cogent or coherent. And again, we can look at the Gospels that are riddled with many myths, as well as other issues as well. And the only evidence for it, again, is simply from the Gospels. And this is fallacious. If the only evidence you have, it's circular reasoning, as I've mentioned, is from it himself. Again, I'm going to bring up things like psychogenic illnesses, mass hallucinations, as well as Paul and his claims of seeing 500 people, as well as other things that actually sort of disprove what my opponent's saying and can really act as a way to discredit it. And I'm hoping for the people watching that will convince them to be like, okay, yeah, I realize that there's not much evidence. In fact, there's no evidence, and it's very contradictory and it's very fallacious as well. So, of course, I haven't mentioned all my things, such as the Virgin Mary, that I'm hoping we're going to discuss later. But yeah, currently that's all I actually have. So I'm going to end my time here. And yeah.
All right, you got about another minute and 12 seconds. You sure you want to end your time?
Yeah, I'll end it here.
All righty, sounds good. So now we are flipping it on the opposite end. You will be giving you will be presenting your case against the resurrection, and afterwards, Jay, aka Mr. Reconstructionist, will be giving his 5-minute rebuttal to what you have to say. So whenever you are ready to...
We get into just a quick question. Will we get into like back and forth as well?
Yeah, cross exams come after you give your case.
Okay, cool. So
wait 1 second. So first round, yeah. So after you give your case and he responds, then we get into cross exams.
Okay, sure.
Sounds good.
Do I have?
You have 10 minutes.
Okay, I don't have to use all of it either.
No, you can use 30 seconds of it if you want. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can.
Sure.
So whenever you're ready to go, I'll start the timer.
Okay. I'm gonna go into more detail about my case against the resurrection and why I don't believe it as a historical event that factually took place. Again, if you were hearing my opening statement, I started with the facts that I can agree upon. And again, these facts have been claimed by other people in history, such as Romulus, the founder of Rome, and he had Persicus, who basically explained how this happened and spread it to other people as well. But yeah, moving into my statements about the Gospels of Mark, John, Matthew, and Luke. Again, we can see contradictions between these Gospels, basically differences, and it makes it unreliable and contradictory. And unreliable and contradictory documents, especially something that claims to be the Word of God, is really not it really does take away from the fact that it was a historical event that the resurrection took place. So again, looking at John 20:12, it says, "And saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot." And in this specific verse, the Marys, as well as someone else, went to tell other people. In Mark, it says both Marys, Mary Magdalene and Mary, went to the tomb, and after looking around, they found the stone was already rolled away. And in this particularly verse and gospel, they went to tell no one. In Matthew, Mary's they were both present, and they found the stone was not yet rolled back, and an earthquake occurred, and an angel rolls it back. And the woman, in this specific verse, go and tell the disciples. I think that's very key as well, because if an earthquake occurred, and the earthquake actually occurred and actually happened, then you think that the disciples would all write it. You think in all the Gospels that it would be present and it would have been written. But what we found is that it's not present at all, and it's in some it's not present, and it's really odd that an event as big as that would not be present in every single one of the Gospels. And of course, in Luke, the Marys and they were all present, and the stone was rolled away, and two men in white were present, is what it says. So if we go over the specific differences, we can see that make it unreliable and contradictory. We can see there's differences in the number of people, the time of day, the number of angels, whether or not the stone was rolled away, the occurrence of an earthquake, what the angel said, and whether or not they told the other disciples as well. Can you hear me? Is everything good?
Yeah, it's all good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so moving on, just give me a moment. Again, another point which I brought up was the Apostle Paul claimed that 500 people saw him. The Apostle Paul himself claimed that 500 people had seen him. But again, it was funny that was the case, but no one else saw that who was with Paul. Paul was with his companions, and no one else had seen that, which I think is very interesting, because a lot of the cases is that, oh my goodness, the disciples couldn't have had a mass hallucination. That couldn't have occurred. But in fact, we do know that in Paul's case, the Apostle Paul, that was most likely the case, that he did hallucinate, yet having other people with him, and none of them saw it. So there's issues with that, and inconsistencies, internal inconsistencies, which undermine the validity of any claim about any resurrection occurring. Moving on, I mentioned shared psychotic disorder, hallucinations, other scientific explanations and naturalistic explanations and materialist explanations that could explain why, even if we take it as factual that they did see something, which again has not been proven outside of the Bible, and scholars or sources have confirmed this, why that would not be the most central explanation that we have, or scientific explanation that we have. Mass hysteria, and there's other reasons as to why this most likely not be a factual thing. Induced psychosis. A lot of people claim to see the Virgin Mary. A lot of people claim many things over the past and seen things, but we characterize this as schizophrenia in the DSM-5, or hallucinations if they claim to have seen someone who they had seen dead and had risen again. Just give me a moment. So I mentioned the Paul as well, and his claims as well, why that doesn't characterize as evidence. Just another point, which again doesn't actually attest to the validity of the resurrection, but I think it's quite interesting. We've got verses that say, "Blessed are those who believe with no evidence," which again, the further from the events that are reported, the more the Gospels try and justify that without believing with evidence, it's valid and more valid, and that's an issue as well. And it's quite ironic that they ironically don't want you to believe with evidence, but they characterize that as well. Moving on to one of my final points, which I'm going to bring up, and hopefully with all these points we can go into more detail after I'm done. But again, I'm just this is something that I'd ask my opponent later, but what evidence would you want if I claim that I'd seen somebody risen from the dead? What sort of evidence would convince you? Other things as well is that the Gospels are quite literally riddled with myths and not easy to discern either. There's many issues that would kind of go against the Gospels. They're non-coherent, they're internally inconsistent, and they're really not confirmed with any other historical data. And I think that's another big issue as well. But I think I'm going to finish there, let my opponent take the floor, and we'll see.
Alrighty, you conceding the rest of your time?
Yeah.
Alrighty. If that is the case, then we will allow Mr. J to go ahead and go as soon as I can give him big screen. Let me send him an unmute invite. Yeah, there's like some white noise in the background, and it's for some reason it drowns him out. So I was like, I'm gonna just mute him to make sure. But you will have 5 minutes on the clock, and just to make sure so everyone's on the same page, you will. And during those 5 minutes, you'll be offering rebuttals to his points, and just to keep everyone updated. I know some of y'all might be, losing it. At the end, there will be a Q&A section, so stick around, save your questions, write them down, do what you got to do. And Mr. Reconstructionist, whenever you go, I will start the clock.
So what did I promise you guys in the beginning? I promised you that if he was going to present an explanation, it was going to be an already defunct explanation. I also said in the beginning in my reply, maybe my opponent wasn't listening, the criteria of authenticity. The Gospels pass that. My opponent started with a presupposition. Well, they're the Gospels. They're the Gospels. So therefore, you can't use the Gospels to glean any evidence, which is on its face ridiculous. But first, let's start with his alternative explanation. He posited hallucination theory. So hallucination theory posits that the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus were merely hallucinations experienced by his disciples. According to this theory, grief, fervent beliefs, and psychological factors contributed to the disciples collectively perceiving Jesus' appearances. Now, here's why there is not a single secular scholar, secular or non-secular, or at least not one that teaches in university, that will put forth the hallucination theory anymore. The hallucination theory faces challenges in explaining the group nature of post-resurrection appearances. Hallucinations are typically individual experiences, yet the accounts describe multiple individuals simultaneously perceiving Jesus. Furthermore, the encounters were not limited to believers, but included skeptics like Paul, who later became a follower of Jesus. And even if I was entertaining this idea that, well, all we have is the Gospels, that's also not correct. The earliest Christian creed, 1 Corinthians 15, dated within months of the resurrection, states, Now I make known to you, brothers and sisters, the gospel which I preach to you, which you also received, in which you also stand, by which you also are saved, if you hold firmly to the word which I preach to you, unless you believed in vain. For I handed down to you as of first importance that I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. After that, he appealed to more than 500 brothers and sisters at one point. So you have something other than the Gospels. You have a source, independent source other than the Gospel. Please, guys, no gifts. Please, guys, I don't need them. You have an independent source other than the Gospels stating that Jesus, in fact, did rise from the dead. Also, within the Gospels, there are contradictions and therefore not true. Sir, the question on, guys, please no gifts. Sir, the question on the table is whether or not Jesus rose from the dead. Whether or not Jesus rose from the dead. If we can agree on the facts of history concerning that, concerning the things that both secular and non-secular historians can agree on, you finding what you believe to be contradictions bears no weight on whether or not we can trust the Gospels to give us reliable information concerning the facts of the resurrection claim. And also, you're wrong about those facts, by the way. You said my claims are baseless, and what you can agree on is that Jesus existed, taught an ethical code, taught repentance. But sir, the majority, including scholars like Bart Ehrman, Michael Grant, also concede that the disciples were the disciples genuinely believed they saw the risen Jesus. The disciples were transformed by these experiences and were willing to die and be persecuted for what they saw. Furthermore, James, a brother of Jesus, was converted. Again, a skeptic. It wasn't just limited to believers. The message was spread, especially in Jerusalem, and they couldn't disprove it. Why? That needs to be held to account. Again, your alternative explanation has been defunct by both secular and non-secular scholars of antiquity. antiquity, nobody holds to hallucination theory. I'm sorry, nobody with any credibility holds to hallucination theory as you posited it. So as I said, you weren't going to be able to actually give a naturalistic explanation. Sure, we should aim towards the natural first. This is a supernatural event. So it lends more credence and more credibility that when given the opportunity to give a naturalistic explanation, no one's been able to give one that satisfies the data we do have. Again, this is agreed to by the majority of both secular and the data points that I posited are agreed to by the majority of both secular and non-secular historians. I'd be happy to give you a list. Furthermore, on the gospel contradiction that you did bring up, since I have like 30 seconds, on the gospel contradiction that you did bring up, it's not a contradiction whatsoever. Maybe we can go into that in Q&A. You just simply didn't understand it. But my point is, even if I were to explain that to you and it were to make sense, it would bear no weight on whether or not you would trust the Gospels. So my question to you would be like, what is your criteria that is so strong, that's better than both secular and non-secular historians, that leads you to believe that the Gospels aren't reliable in terms of ironing out those facts? And also, what's a better naturalistic explanation? One, preferably that's not defunct.
Alrighty, perfectly timed. So now, after we have gotten into that, we will go into the cross-examination, where we will have one opponent ask the other one direct questions to challenge your authenticity. So on the first round, who wants to be asked questions first? Is it because, Jay, you went first, you get asked questions, or you ask questions first? Which one?
I have no idea, but I'm not really.
Well, I mean, again, I don't mind. I don't know exactly.
Okay, so we'll let
You can just.
we'll let A Train ask his questions first,
Okay.
and then Reconstructionist can answer. So you got 10 minutes for the cross exam.
It's 5 minutes of him. Do you want to switch it to the format we had in the beginning, the layout, or do you like this?
What do you mean?
I think you should do 5 minutes. Me asking in 5 minutes.
Oh, I see. I think I see what you're saying. I see what you're asking. I see what you're asking. Give me 1 second. Locked in. Christ prayed that we be.
Locked in.
Yeah. Christ prayed that we be one like him and the Father are one. Exactly. There we go. Alrighty. So we will have a 10-minute format for this. So whenever you're ready, A Train, start your questions, and I'll start the timer.
Okay, yeah. So, in terms of questions, I do have quite a few questions. So I'm trying to think like where I'm going to start. But I'm going to ask my opponent, what do you think is the most likely explanation for the resurrection? If you could just, as in like, if you could just re-explain your point, because you kind of said a lot of stuff that was very like, it was kind of like a word salad, I'm not going to lie. And so I'm just trying to ask you to re-clarify your position, just so I can be clear.
Could you repeat the question one more time?
Ooh.
Could you re-clarify what evidence you believe you have for the resurrection in simple terms and not like over complicating it as well?
I didn't know it was complicated. Okay, all right, sure. So, and I'll just summarize this. One, considering the facts that we do have that we can rely upon, considering the criteria of authenticity as the Gospels have passed that test. Jesus, based on these facts, based on these 11 notable events, the most likely conclusion is that Jesus rose from the dead. Jesus died by crucifixion. Jesus was buried.
No, yeah, carry on. Sorry.
So Jesus died by crucifixion. Right. So Jesus was buried in the tomb.
Okay.
Jesus' death caused the disciples to despair. The disciples genuinely believed that they saw the risen Jesus. The disciples were transformed by these experiences and were willing to die and be persecuted.
I would even argue that they didn't all genuinely believe. The reason why I mentioned the verse of blessed are those who believe no evidence. Blessed are those who believe no evidence is because originally when he saw Jesus, he didn't actually believe. So I would even argue that that's not fully accounted for.
I want to ask you a question back because I don't. Okay, it's your Q&A, so you can ask me questions, but I don't agree with that. But go ahead.
So you made the claim that you believe that all the disciples they all believed that it was Jesus when they saw him. Is that the claim you're making? Just so I can.
I made the claim that the plurality of both secular and non-secular scholars of antiquity agree that the disciples genuinely believe they saw the risen Jesus. Yes, that was my claim.
Which scholars are you saying? Because I'm pretty sure that is not factual whatsoever.
Pinchas Lapide, Michael Grant, Paula Fredrickson, Geza Vermes, John Dominic Crossan, E.P. Sanders, Maurice Casey, John Mayer, Marcus Borg, Jacob Kramer, Hans Kozelman, Helmut Koester, Bart Ehrman, and Gerd Ludman. That's just to name a few. It's the majority.
Number one,
those are non-Christian. All those are non-Christian.
Yeah, I know. Bart Ehrman actually doesn't. I was actually watching a video of his the other day, and he literally explains that he doesn't actually believe that whatsoever, or any of the facts that you're claiming are facts. That's not the case. That's one, for example. Again, I would have to have a proper source to clarify what you're saying, but I know that you're being dishonest because you're claiming people they believe that, and that's not.
It's a Q&A session. Try to keep the questions.
Let me carry on with questions. I've got another question. If I claim that, let's say, I saw Martin Luther King rise from the dead, what sort of evidence would you expect for you to believe that, and that I saw him?
For you to believe that?
No, for you. If I claim that I saw Martin Luther King, had risen from the dead, and like, you know, I see him physically, I can speak to him, like it came to the disciples kind of in the Gospels, what sort of evidence would you expect to believe that?
In lieu of a camera, because we have cameras today, camera footage, are you trying to judge based off of today's standards of what we have, or how do you want me to answer?
I mean, you can do that, and let's say a couple thousand years ago as well.
Okay, so let's say it was a couple thousand years ago and you didn't have cameras.
Yeah.
Is that better? Okay, cool. I would expect other people to be saying this as well. I don't know you that well, so first, I would think you were a crazy person. I would have to establish what is your reliability. What is your relationship to Martin Luther King? Do you have a motive by which you would want to see him raised from the dead? In which case you have a motive to lie about him being raised from the dead. So what's your motive here? Are there people that maybe don't agree with Martin Luther King or hate Martin Luther King also saying that he rose from the dead? So what are his enemies saying? All this raises the probability. Yeah, and all that could still mean, but yeah, those are just some of the things. And if you were, if we're trying to make this a one-to-one, if you were like at gunpoint, right, your enemies and the ones who, Martin Luther King's enemies and the ones who followed him were at gunpoint, and they're like, hey, all you got to do is stop saying that Martin Luther King rose from the dead, and you're Gucci, you're good. And you still stuck by Martin Luther King rose from the dead when there's no benefit to you other than you possibly unaliving, then yeah, all of that raises the probability that Martin Luther King actually rose from the dead.
You are aware that people can believe things that are false and even, die for false beliefs, be unalive for false beliefs. You're aware of that, right? So yeah. Just because someone may be unalive for a belief doesn't now make that belief true. Are you aware of that?
Wait, hang on. Is that a question? Just because someone.
Yeah, a question. I'm just asking. Like, do you? Let me pose it in a more inquisitive way. So, do you think that just because someone is unalive for a certain belief, that makes that belief true?
No, not just because of that.
Okay. So, and also, let's say that a lot of other people are claiming a belief as well as me. Does that now make that claim true as well?
Not just because of that, no.
Okay, so I don't know. I can't remember exactly what the other points were. You spoke quite fast. I didn't write it down. But my point is that even the points that you made, just because those were the other cases, doesn't now make my claim true. And so you still get to posit some sort of evidence. I like how first you brought up camera footage, and I think that's a very good point. I think camera footage would be very good in making a claim, supposing it didn't involve any CGI. But of course, and even in the case that you write them down as well, thousands of years ago, again, doesn't make it true. And that's all we kind of have with the Gospels. So I guess moving on to my other question is that do you acknowledge that there are contradictions in the Gospel accounts of the resurrection?
No.
No, so you don't believe there are any contradictions?
No.
Okay. All All right. I'm not sure if this involves like us having a back and forth. It is just straight fire questions.
No Q&A.
Okay then.
It's just straight fire questions.
Okay. Yeah. I guess I'll give the floor. I'll proceed my time. That's what I'll ask for now.
Alrighty, you got another 2.5 minutes. No more questions?
No, that'll be good.
Alrighty, so now we'll switch it up. We got Reconstructionist Mr. J, who's got 10 minutes worth of questions for A-Train, and whenever he begins his first question, I will start the clock.
Yeah, what is evidence to you? Can you give me like just a brief definition of what you consider evidence?
Yeah, sure. So evidence is empirical data, or historical empirical data that can be verified by multiple peer-reviewed sources, and that can actually be confirmed that an actual event, or in this case, this actual event has taken place. Actual physical data and evidence, especially in science, is how we come to what we see as evidence, when it can be, verified by multiple peer-reviewed sources, and that is actually being confirmed. In the case of the resurrection, I don't believe that has been the case.
Okay, if that's your definition of, I just asked you for a definition of evidence. You gave that one to me. If that's your definition of evidence, then is there evidence that you love your mother?
In terms of evidence that I love my mother, again, I don't know if you asked me like in terms of like you asked me to say that, but in that case, if I was to posit to you that there's evidence that I love my mother. Again, I provide you with certain examples.
Is it based on, sure. This is my 10 minutes. I'm just trying to get an answer to the questions. Is it based on that definition of evidence that you gave me? And if so, can you please provide the peer-reviewed sources that you love your mother?
Again, if there's not any evidence, I'm talking about in terms of historical facts in this situation.
Yeah, no, okay, awesome. So what I asked you for was just a definition of evidence. I didn't ask you for in this situation. What is evidence? Like, just define it for me philosophically, maybe.
Philosophically, again, I'm going to just define it to you how it's actually defined. Again, if I'm trying to put it in more simple ways so that you'd understand it, it's basically just, the amount, the body of facts and data that indicates a certain claim, event. It can be.
Yeah, that's it. Yes. It's a available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or proposition is true. Yes. So if Jesus rose from the dead, would we expect as evidence people claiming that he rose from the dead? Would we expect to see that?
Again, as you said, that depends on the motives of those people, exactly whether we know they're pretending or not, what else.
No. I'm sorry. Reclaiming my time. I'm simply asking you, if someone did rise from the dead, would we expect, as part of our evidence, would we expect to see people claiming he rose from the dead, or read about people claiming he rose from the dead?
As I just mentioned, again, it's context dependent. In this case, you have to look at the motives. As you brought the examples, many examples, it depends on the motive of those people. So again, in this situation,
whether or not it was hang on.
Followers and they want to spread the word.
A-Train,
that's exactly what we expect.
Stop, please, moderate. Stop. You're trying to run down my time. I did not say whether or not.
It's a simple answer to your question.
I did not say.
A-Train.
Hold on. Let him ask the question, because you're not answering that particular question.
You're not at all. I didn't ask you about the reliability of the people making the claim. I asked you because you brought up evidence.
You know what reliability is?
A-Train.
This
isn't reliable. You can interrupt.
It's his cross exam. You can't ask him questions.
So I didn't ask you about the reliability of the people making the claim. I asked you, given any if somebody made a claim about anything, like specifically a resurrection of anybody, would we expect to see as part of the evidence people actually making the claim that the person rose from the dead? Would that be a part of the evidence? I didn't say all of it. I didn't say that would convince you. Would that be a part of the evidence? People making the claim that he rose from the dead?
I can only repeat my answer so many times. It's context dependent. If you would like me to give my answer in this specific situation, I can. But if you're just not going to take
wait, hang on.
It's not helping you out.
A-Train. Okay, awesome. A-Train, I have a question that's going to expose how dishonest you're being right now. All right, so listen up. Okay, fine. Context dependent. Give me the context of a resurrection claim where you would not expect to see people making the claim that the person rose from the dead? Give me the context.
So you're asking me to give you the context in which people wouldn't make the claim of a resurrection?
Where we would not expect people to be, if there was a claim written down, right? We didn't know who wrote it down that said Martin Luther King rose from the dead, right? If there was no one else, because you said it was context dependent, whether or not, we would expect people to see as evidence, we would expect to see people actually making the claim that the person rose from the dead. You said it was context dependent. And so give me the context in which you would not expect to see people actually making the claim that, for example, Martin Luther King rose from the dead.
Again, for example, if I know they didn't care for the claim, or they didn't want it to spread, or they didn't really care for it, that could be an example in the case where they would not make the claim. So again, I don't know if you want to rephrase your question, but I don't think you're catching on to what I'm saying. But I can only say my answer so many times. So if you want to repeat your question again, I can only give you the same answer. If you want to actually go into the topic at hand, then you can, instead of doing red herrings.
I will say, for the sake of time, it probably would be better to move on to another question, because this it kind of is going in circles.
That's fair enough. All right. Your explanation, the hallucination theory, the more we've actually known, the more we've actually learned about the human body, the less likely that has been, which is why, again, you will not find a plurality of secular scholars of antiquity that will go with hallucination theory, because it doesn't explain the events. So do you have another naturalistic explanation, or would you like to provide a counter to the counter I gave to your hallucination theory as an alternative explanation?
I don't even think the counter you gave to my hallucination theory was at all relevant. You didn't even give a counter to why that couldn't be the case. Again, I brought the example of mass hysteria, mass psychogenic illness, also known as mass sociogenic illness as well. It's when there's shared false beliefs between multiple people, and it's a claim that, for example, there's a dance in favor of the Middle Ages that has been well documented and is caused by mass hysteria. We know that this is probably the most probable, even in the case that we posit.
Okay,
that,
awesome. So why? Hang on. Awesome. So why did the majority of secular and secular and non-secular scholars of antiquity?
That is not even true.
Excuse me, he's got to finish his question.
Why did the majority of both secular and non-secular scholars of antiquity reject hallucination theory as a reasonable explanation concerning the events? Why do they reject it?
Again, I told you that that's not the case. I even brought up the example of Bart Ehrman, that he literally made the claim that that could be a positive explanation. That's not true at all. That majority of secular or even theistic scholars even agree on that claim. So again, I don't know how to respond to somebody just saying things that are just lies. But again, I can only say again, that's not the case. That majority of the scholars actually agree upon that claim that you just made.
Okay, you cannot support that whatsoever. But let's see, 2 minutes. I hate that we spent that much time on that question. You're right. I should have moved on when you were being dishonest about it. So what would be good evidence that Jesus rose from the dead?
You asked me what would be good evidence that Jesus rose from the dead?
Yeah.
Again, I believe that camera footage of him rising from the dead would probably be a good example, like you mentioned as well. But of course, in that case, there's literally no actual evidence whatsoever that actually is sufficient enough to actually support a claim. We know that extraordinary claims require extraordinary amounts of evidence, and Shafar, in terms of resurrection, there's not been any positive actual evidence outside of biblical sources that actually confirm the resurrection as being a fact. And that's the exact issue and the subject of the debate, which I've been explaining to you, but for some reason you're just not understanding.
Yeah, can you demonstrate why either the 1 Corinthians 15 creed or the Gospels cannot be reliable in order to give us data or evidence concerning the resurrection claim?
Because they are literally claims. They stay baseless claims without any evidence. Again, if someone writes it in a book thousands of years ago, that does not now make it true. There's no evidence which I've been...
I didn't say... Wait, hang on.
Yeah.
hang on. I did not say that makes it true. So on the facts that we can agree on, Jesus' crucifixion, the disciples, they despaired and they truly believed that he rose from the, well, they truly believed that he rose from the dead. The skeptics and the believers alike saying that he rose from the dead. Where do scholars get those from?
Again, as I mentioned, the Bible is riddled with a lot of myths. I'm not saying that every single thing is claiming that it's been false. I'm just saying there are many claims which have not been proven true. Then defeat the reliability of the Gospels as well.
This is non-responsive.
It's literally a response to what you said.
Alrighty, that's the end of that one. So now we are moving into the third and final round. Clarifications and additional arguments. We have both parties with 10-minute arguments where they would be reinforcing key points that might have been underaddressed, and both parties will basically do this for their respective side. So we're going to go first with Reconstructionist because he started first, so it only makes sense to make him go first. Oh my goodness, I have to do this again. There we go. Alrighty, so we got 10 minutes on the clock for this. Of course, you don't have to take the entire 10 minutes. What are you doing? Stop that. I didn't mean to do that. Yo, that's crazy. Alrighty, whenever you start with your point, I will begin the timer.
Okay, so a couple things on this. Number one, just to re-clarify, and the question I asked him right at the end there, hey, the claims that you can agree upon, Jesus existing, teaching repentance, claims of Messiah, those claims that both secular and non-secular historians agree to, where do we get those from? Because his claim was that the Gospels were unreliable because of contradictions, which the contradictions he brought up weren't even contradictions at all. But where do we get those from? If he was honest, he would say the scriptures. He would say the scriptures. And why? Because the scriptures pass the criteria of authenticity, as I went over in the beginning. Number two, we agreed, at least I hope we did, on the definition of evidence, the available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or a proposition is true. I asked him to be honest with me. Okay, if we raise, if someone were to make a claim that someone rose from the dead, would we expect to see people actually claiming that that person rose from the dead? If there's a claim that someone rose from the dead, would we expect people to actually say that he rose from the dead? Well, the answer is yes. So the fact that people said it actually raises the probability that he actually rose from the dead. It is evidence. It's just not enough evidence for you. Secondly, we didn't really get into this much, but the fact that people were willing to die and be persecuted for something that if it weren't true, they would have known it wasn't true. And again, on the hallucination theory, this is widely rejected. The hallucination theory posits that the post-crucifixion appearances of Jesus were merely hallucinations. The hallucination theory faces challenges in explaining the group nature of the post-resurrection appearances. They're typically individual experiences, and even if you could have something that was, well, more group related, it doesn't make any sense that skeptics, people that weren't following Jesus, in fact, anti to Jesus, were also saying that he rose from the dead. So you had skeptics and non-believers both mass hallucinating. One, why? For the believers, we understand that could be a grief-stricken hallucination, which also, again, would not explain their group nature, even amongst his mother and the other women. Number three, the people that wrote this down, the people that carried this forth, what motive do they have to write in, if they truly believe this happened, what motive again do they have to write in that women were the first ones to see the resurrected Jesus? It lessens the credibility. It lessens the credibility of it. So if this is just made up from a lifelong, apparently mass hallucination, why put women in there? It would lessen the credibility if it weren't true. Again, these are questions that he can't answer, and the answers that he does have are either flat out lies or obfuscations of the point. Next, I'll cover very briefly this idea that the Matthean, the contradiction that he's bringing up as far as like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and the resurrection appearances. Let's see. I have 6 minutes. I have enough time. All right. So the events of the tomb, this contradiction that he brings up is one unrelated to the resurrection whatsoever. But since he brought it up, we'll answer it. All right. So people at the tomb. Matthew says Mary came to the tomb. Mark adds Salome. Luke adds Joanna and other women. And John only says Mary, right? But notice in all of those, none of them say that the other women weren't there. They just highlight the women that were there. This is a historical historical practice called telescoping. It's glossing over or compressing details so they can focus on their main point. The Gospels are all independent sources focusing on a central point of Jesus's life. So time, dawn by the time they arrived. Bethany was 2 miles away. So if they left when it was dark, they would arrive in Jerusalem by dawn. John 11:18. Again, there's no contradiction between these. The stone, Matthew does not claim that this happened upon the woman's arrival. You won't find that in the verse whatsoever. The stone being rolled away. Angels, 2 angels, neither Matthew or Mark explicitly say there was only one. They only mention the one, but they don't explicitly say that there were only one. Where did the appearance happen? Mary, Mag, and the others go to the tomb. When Mary sees that the rocks rolled away, she immediately runs away so she doesn't see the angel. The other women see the angel and leave to tell the disciples. Mary returns to the tomb with Peter and John, who are probably staying in Jerusalem, John 13:15. Peter and John return to the house after seeing the empty tomb. Jesus appears to Mary outside the tomb. 2, Jesus appears to the other women on the way back to Bethany. C, he appears to Clopas and the others. D, to Peter, and then to the other, to Peter and John and the 8. So that's your grand explanation of what you said was the contradiction in the resurrection account. There is no contradiction. You just have to want to understand narrative criticism of the text, textual criticism of the text, and how it flows together. So again, not a single gospel says that only these people were there. But again, this has nothing to do with the question at hand, which is, did Jesus rise from the dead? Do we have evidence for that? You say we have no evidence. But again, the fact that they were willing to die is evidence that they truly believed it. They were willing to die. They were willing to die for it. For a hallucination, and even the enemies, the skeptics, were willing to die. Number 2, hang on, what was it? What was the other point? I wrote it down. Number 2, the resurrection again was not limited to just believers. If it was just believers, maybe you'd have a point of some type of bias. But it was also skeptics. Number 3, the people. Even if I granted hallucination, this is even worse for you. Even if I granted hallucination, why in the world, if it were a hallucination, why in the world weren't the people with sober minds, means, and motive unable to disprove him? The resurrection account has been followed through all of church history. From the very beginning, we know this is what they believe. The 1 Corinthians 15 Creed. Once again, you said it was just the Gospels. You were wrong on that. The 1 Corinthians 15 Creed is prior to the Gospels. So you were wrong about that. So why in the world weren't people who had the means and the motive able to disprove this, right? If someone were to say that, well, Martin Luther King, to use your example again, Martin Luther King rose from the dead, well, we'd be able to disprove that. And we'd have the means and the motive to do it, depending on who you were. Certainly the enemies would have the means and the motive to do it. So not only could his enemies not disprove it, they were converted by seeing him rise from the dead. You failed to actually demonstrate an alternative explanation that explains any of these facts. Let's see. I'll land there. Wait for the Q&A.
You're 100% sure? You got another 2 minutes left.
I'm good.
All righty, sounds good. You actually technically do have another section after this. There's literally just closing statements, which are 5 minutes each, but we can skip those if you want. Doesn't really matter to me. I'll let y'all decide once he goes for his third round, clarifications and additional arguments. You will have 10 minutes, Mr. A-Train, and whenever you start talking, the clock will begin.
Thank you. Yeah, truth be told, I'm gonna be honest, not a single shred of evidence was provided, not a single bit of evidence was provided for any of the claims that were made. Again, what I did tag onto something that he said, which I liked, was that evidence that the disciples truly believed what had happened, but doesn't actually provide evidence that it did actually happen. And he's talking about again saying, oh, a woman, they're not credible witnesses. Again, this doesn't provide any more evidence for the claims that he was actually making. Again, as I mentioned, there's not a single amount of credible sources that are backing up what he's saying. From what we have, even from Josephus, Roman sources like Tacitus, and even from the Synoptic Gospels, we know that it's simply not reliable, that the claims that are being made, and that it's just, he's only trying to make points around it. That's not actually providing evidence for the claims that was actually the case. There's a lot of built-in intuitions and presuppositions that are made when we're talking about the base facts that I even said that I agreed with, which were, if I could find it, that he existed. He got into dispute with Roman authorities, that he was killed by crucifixion, and groups of people claimed to have seen him. Again, none of the evidence is being provided. No points have been made that are actually supporting what is said. Again, now, a big point that I made was the contradictions within the accounts of when Mary's found the tomb and supposed angels and earthquakes. Again, that was another point that I made. And to recap, in Mark 16, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome went to the tomb after sunrise, but they found it was already rolled away. They told no one about Jesus' body being missing. In Matthew 28, Mary Magdalene and Mary, presumably the Mary mother of James, went to the tomb to dawn and saw the stone had not yet been rolled back. A violent earthquake occurs and an angel descends, who then rolls back the stone. The woman ran to tell to the disciples. In Luke 24, it says that Mary Magdalene, Joanna, the Mary mother of James, and others went to the tomb very early in the morning to find the tomb already rolled away and two men in white present. And finally, in John 20, only Mary Magdalene is named, and she goes while it's dark to the tomb of Jesus, only to find the tomb was already rolled away, and she ran to tell the disciples. Again, there's a common tactic used by dishonest theists that they say, oh, well, they didn't technically say only. Again, this is the word of God we're talking about. It's meant to be supposedly extremely reliable. If it's this important, then God would be able to actually provide proper evidence and would actually have the sources agree with each other. And big events such as earthquakes would not supposedly just so happen to not have been written in some of the Gospels. So again, I already mentioned the differences with these four accounts are the number of people, the time of day, the number of angels, whether or not the stone was rolled away, the occurrence of an earthquake, what the angels said, and whether or not they told anyone. And again, some of these discrepancies, perhaps the excuse of my opponent wants to be that, oh, there can be excuses minor. However, again, this is the word of God. Again, in Timothy 2, it says God breathed. So according to the Timothy, that this is the word of God. Again, there shouldn't be this many discrepancies. And the only valid explanation is that it undermines the reliability. And it basically means the Gospels are basically the claim that Jesus resurrected is not a fact whatsoever. And I think this is very key in what I'm saying, and that my opponent has failed to address any of what I said, any of the points in that, and supposedly because it provides evidence against my opponent's claims. And again, I don't understand why my opponent refuses to address that, and again, just refutes and obfuscates and goes back to the point of, oh, the scholars and historians agree, when in reality, I've just showed you the evidence with the sources of Josephus, Tacitus, and the Synoptic Gospels that that's not the case. They don't agree with that whatsoever. And hallucination theory was another claim that was brought by my opponent. Again, he made the false claim that majority of scholars disagree that hallucination theory is a valid fact. That's actually not the case. Again, he brought up the example Bar Ehrman. Again, for example, he even posits that it could actually be an absolutely valid case that it could be a valid case that they were hallucinating. Again, I brought the example of Paul, where he claimed that 500 people had seen him. And again, it was funny that the companions of Paul didn't actually see what he was seeing. And this was even before the other case. And so you'd expect that other people would have seen it, but it didn't happen. It was just Paul, even when he was around other people. So the mass hallucination is definitely a actual better naturalistic explanation. Again, my opponent has not brought in any hardcore evidence. As I said, video camera footage, I brought up examples, but of course that not being the case back then really does undermine the claim. And my opponent even said that as a valid possible way of there being evidence, which again has not been provided as well. Shared psychotic disorder is also another explanation as well. Again, neither of these claims have been addressed. My opponent hasn't provided evidence. My opponent, all it's done is obfuscate and say, oh, well, there were women as well, so it's why would they lie? Again, that's not evidence. People, we know in past that people have been persecuted for their beliefs. That does not make the beliefs true, fact, or evidence. But my opponent seems to differ. He seems to think that because people were supposedly persecuted, that suddenly makes their claims factual, when that's not the case whatsoever. And we know that in history that many other people have also claimed to have risen. Many other people have claimed to be God. Many other people have claimed to have seen people who have possibly passed away. We'd refer them to a mental health professional and say that they, this person may have schizophrenia, maybe hallucinating. We know that there's actual scientific explanations for these possible things that happen. And again, there's been no addressing of any of the points that I've been bringing up. And my opponent just seems to not want to avoid that, most likely because it doesn't actually, most likely because it actually refutes what he's saying. Just to go over, the Gospels are non-coherent. They're internally inconsistent, and again, they have not been supported or corroborated by historical data whatsoever. And again, the supernatural claims require supernatural evidence, such as camera footage. But if my opponent is incapable of providing that, then there's just a bunch of more baseless claims without any actual hardcore evidence. As you mentioned, the body of facts are available. We do not have the body of facts that support what my opponent is saying. And again, I will bring this to the audience as well. Me speaking to the audience, if I made the claim that I saw Martin Luther King risen after he passed away, risen from the dead, what sort of evidence would you want to believe me? If I'd written it down, especially in unreliable, contradictory books, it wouldn't actually help support my claim, and it just provides more inconsistencies. And if you see, so many inconsistencies, it again undermines the claims that are being made. I think I'm gonna see the floor, and I'm gonna see.
Alrighty, sounds good. We got 2.5 minutes left. You want to keep going, or you think you're done? 100%. Alrighty, so we have one of two options. We can get straight into Q&A, or we can do closing statements, 5 minutes each. What do y'all want to do?
I think we should go into Q&A. I feel like, but
let me go ahead and hit up my closing statement.
Alrighty, sounds good. Give me 1 second. Let me set up that timer for you. 5 minutes. I don't know why I keep doing that. There we go. Alrighty, whenever you start, I'll start the clock.
Yeah, so we agreed to my definition of evidence, which my opponent doesn't seem to want to stick to. Notice he said there's no hardcore evidence. When asked the question to stick to it, I said, hey, if someone made the claim, as he mentioned again, Martin Luther King rose from the dead, would we expect to see as evidence other people saying that he rose from the dead if he truly rose from the dead? That was the question. Not that if they made the claim that he rose from the dead, that means he actually rose from the dead. No. The claim that we have, the evidence that we have, is a plurality of evidence, a plurality of factors that lead to only one plausible explanation, or only one most likely explanation, that Jesus actually rose from the dead. Again, he keeps bringing up the unreliability of the Gospels. I don't know why he's doing this, because his main point of contention to try and prove this, that the Gospels are just unreliable, are the resurrection accounts. And all he has to say to the explanation that I gave him, I just went down with it. As you said earlier, I talk a little fast, so maybe you didn't hear it. But my explanation goes point by point on why, one, they're not contradictory with each other, because they don't explicitly say whatsoever that these women weren't there, that the stone was here, and that this doesn't align with that. You heard it. I'll explain it again if somebody asks it in the Q&A. But point being, it doesn't contradict whatsoever. If you employ narrative criticism of the text, this actually makes sense. Let's see. Yeah, this isn't a contradiction. I explained all of this. Again, on your hallucination theory, what Bart Ehrman has agreed to is the counter, provides a challenge, which is what I said. Full counter, the hallucination theory faces challenges in explaining the group nature of the post-resurrection appearances. Hallucinations are typically individual experiences, yet the accounts describe multiple individuals simultaneously perceiving Jesus. And again, it wasn't just Paul. Paul was it wasn't just believers. Paul was a skeptic, and so was James. So you'd have to explain his individual hallucination when he wasn't following Jesus. In fact, he was persecuting Christians. James' individual hallucination, and then the group hallucinations, which hallucination theory does not do, and Bart Ehrman does agree to that. Even if he still says that, well, yeah, he believes it's possible, he acknowledges the counter. He acknowledges the counter that even with that theory, you cannot explain the group nature of the events. So one, they believe they rose. They truly believe that they saw the risen Jesus. If you believe that it was a hallucination, by the way, I don't know why you made this counter earlier, because you said that, well, no, I don't believe that they actually believe that, they saw the risen Jesus. If you believe it was a hallucination, then yes, you certainly do believe that they saw the risen Jesus. You believe it was a hallucination. You don't believe that they were lying about it. So that earlier point you made right at the very beginning, you debunked it with your own alternative case. And again, you don't have an alternative case that actually answers the points that I've given. You don't have one, right? So again, going over it one more time, if they were, in fact, lying about this or just hallucinating about it, the people just hallucinating about it. The people that had the means and the motive to prove them wrong could have proved them wrong. I have not seen you answer that once as to why they wouldn't. These were very religious Jews. The Pharisees certainly were very religious Jews. They did not like the Messianic Jews that were popping up. They did not like them. Instead of persecuting them, instead of going to Rome, it's very easy. Produce the body. Produce the body. They had the means and the motive. Sober minds, because you believe that they were just hallucinating. So sober-minded people could have been able to do that. They didn't do it. The resurrection was a central message to early Christianity. The resurrection message caused the church to grow. So a hallucination that could have been easily disproven by producing the body caused the church to grow. That's what you believe? A hallucination that was had in group setting, not only by believers, but by skeptics, caused the church to grow? Come on, man. You don't believe what you just said, right? Let's see. So again, taking the your adjectives to your claims that, well, this isn't evidence. This isn't extraordinary evidence. This isn't hardcore evidence. Is it evidence? The answer is yes. The problem with my opponent is that it's not enough evidence for him. That is not the same. The question is, did Jesus rise from the dead? Unless you can explain these facts using some alternative explanation without any counters, you don't have it.
That is time. All righty. So, Mr. A Train,
I will give a closing statement to that. I will absolutely do that. Do tell me when I can start now.
Alrighty, sounds good. You got 5 minutes on the 5 minutes on the clock. I'm trying to make sure that I'm not lagging. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, okay.
Wait, hold on.
So
Jay,
again,
repeat after me. Testing 1, 2, 3. I think I'm lagging.
Sorry. Testing 1, 2, 3. I heard you clearly.
Okay, just making sure because I think I'm a little bit behind. But sorry about that. I don't know what my Wi-Fi is doing. Whenever you're ready, A Train, I'll go ahead and start the clock for you.
Yep. So I'm ready again. My opponent has brought up a lot of points that, again, are just baked in assertions and presuppositions, and is literally putting words into my mouth that I literally did not claim. Again, the only facts I posited at the start of the debate was that he existed when the dispute with Roman authorities, was killed by crucifixion, and groups of people claimed to have seen him. I never mentioned about anybody as well, or there was an empty tomb. Even Bart Ehrman and other scholars as well agree that there was no empty tomb, and they don't agree on that, and he could have been buried in a mass grave, for example. They don't agree that that was the case. And again, I bring up the contradictions because, again, if it's the word of God, it should be infallible, and it should be consistent, cogent, and coherent. It should work together and corroborate in a timely fashion, but it absolutely doesn't in this case, and there's many contradictions, and these are actual valid criticisms because, again, I would say that this posits that there's actually contradictory, that if the sources don't agree, then there's absolutely going to be issues as well with that as well. And again, all these claims of, oh, these people said this and these people said that, we know that that wasn't specifically the case in the past. I mentioned the only sources we have are from Josephus, Tacitus, and the Synoptic Gospels, as well as letters of Paul. And Paul is a very important point because again, the claim that Paul said 500 people had seen him as well was before, and he had companions with him. And in terms of group hallucinations, the companions didn't claim to have seen what Paul had seen. So it doesn't add up and work up if it's the case that that was actually a hallucination that had occurred. And so in the case of group hallucinations, it actually doesn't make sense, and it doesn't work or provide evidence that that's the case because, again, there's simply, it doesn't work. There's no evidence of it. It's simply contradictory. And I've mentioned this multiple times before. And again, mass hysteria, we know these things happen as well. The only evidence we have is what is written by other people who have made claims. We don't actually have evidence that that's the case. And again, I mentioned the Gospels are a mix of possible historical facts as well as other issues and complete myths and riddles as well. And again, I brought up that this is contradictory. Again, explain the contradiction of the word of God is that God breathed. If it's God's word, it should be infallible. There should be no contradictions. And again, I don't know how many times I need to bring this up, but my opponent hasn't addressed any of that. And again, it's just a refusal to address it because he knows he's wrong, and there's simply nothing I can do about that. The only thing I can say is that that's the case. He's made a bunch of baseless claims that are not, in fact, true, has lied about claiming that historians actually agree on certain evidence, which isn't the case whatsoever. It is not likely that Jesus resurrected from the dead. Again, I brought up the example of possibly a mass grave, other issues as well. And again, the only facts I agreed with is I'm repeating myself because I don't know how many times I need to say it, and my opponent refused to address it. So there's not really much I can do there. We don't know that there was an empty tomb. He's claiming that that's a fact that we do know. We don't know. And that's not true whatsoever. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the evidence that my opponent is trying to provide is simply not good evidence whatsoever. And I agree that it would constitute as some amount of evidence, but it is absolutely not the case that it proves the resurrection occurred, and a bunch of other baseless claims that, oh, he was persecuted back then, or why would people try and do that? That doesn't actually work in their actual explanations as to why that could be the case. And they, of course, could be lying as well. I actually have hallucinations, which I brought up as well. And again, it's not providing solid actual evidence that is actually positing that it is a truthful claim. And I don't believe that all the other claims that my opponent has tried to bring up, although, mixing facts with non-facts to try and further his agenda, have actually proven any of the claims that my opponent has made or that the resurrection has taken place. And so, again, I really don't know what else to do if my opponent isn't going to be honest. I can only bring up my rebuttals and only can keep repeating them. And if you're going to refuse to acknowledge historical facts or refuse to acknowledge actual verified data, there's only so much I can do. I refuse to acknowledge the contradictions that occur in the books instead of trying to use excuses such as it didn't use certain words and making up falsified things. Then there's only so much I can do as well. I've tried my best to debate, but there's only so much I can do. So yeah, I think I'm gonna leave it with 30 seconds left.
Alrighty, sounds good. And with this, we can move into the Q&A, and mainly because of the layout that was given to me. Give me one second. Well, first off, I got to stop this. We can do it. This says 5 minutes. I don't really like 5 minutes. Let's do 10 minutes. But before I start the timer, because I'm greedy, can't help it. What I do want to do is I want to ask just two simple questions. I'm not going to take up too much time myself. I just want to ask two simple questions, just yes or no, just to make sure that we can get into Q&A for everyone else. Let me go ahead and turn on the request box. Settings. As soon as I can learn how to do that. You think after 2 years I'd know how to use this godforsaken app. Allow requests from viewers. There we go. All right. So just two quick questions for A Train. If George, since you didn't want to answer the Reconstructionist question in the way that he answered, let me see. I do want to test your honesty. If George Washington was president, would we expect people to write that down?
I absolutely do believe that we would expect some historical data and sources that would be written down and saying that he was president. Sure.
Okay, so when things happen in history, people write them down. I just want to make sure that was a standard that we had.
Validify them or make them.
Didn't say that it did. I just wanted to make sure you wouldn't answer Reconstructionist questions. So I just wanted to make sure that we could keep.
I did answer this question, but he didn't want to accept my answer.
That's fine if you believe that. Okay, so the second question is, and this one's a little bit longer, so just listen. If a husband is asked by his wife where their son is, and the husband says he went to the store, and a few minutes later, the wife asks the husband, where is our daughter? And he says, with our son at the store. Is this a contradiction, and did the husband lie?
So, again, the reason why this analogy doesn't work, I see the analogy you're trying to make between, it didn't mention side details of that, and so it could have, there's no contradiction. But again, in the case of the Gospels and Jesus' resurrection, there it claims there was things such as an earthquake. Big events like this would absolutely be mentioned in the Gospels, and it wouldn't just be I didn't include that. And that shows the internal inconsistencies as well as others within the Gospels, which is exactly the point that I'm trying to make. It's the word of God. Again, I don't believe that you're claiming to be God or have made the universe or have infallible word that you breathe into existence as according to 2 Timothy. So again, I don't believe that yours would be actually corroborating as cogent, but in this case, it's not. So
okay, that's excellent, but that doesn't answer my question. Is this a contradiction, and did the husband lie? I asked the yes or no question.
Yes or no. Again, I can't give a yes or no question to something like that. I can only.
If I ask you if the sky, if I ask you if the sky is blue, I should expect to hear nothing but yes or no. I'm asking you: is this a contradiction? Did the husband lie?
Yes or no.
I didn't. I'm not asking anything. Hold on. I'm not asking anything about the Bible, though. I didn't ask anything about the Bible. I'm just asking about this situation with the husband and the wife.
Sure, I'll give you a no.
Okay. Alrighty. So time to start letting up guests. I know that Chris Claus had a question. I'm just going to go from top to bottom. Everyone keep your questions rather simple. Let's not go too much time. And whenever the answer to the first question starts, I'll start the timer. Not when they start talking, though.
A Train, I have a question for you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Would a historical text, writings, and personal experiences be an example of empirical evidence?
I believe that they can be some form of empirical evidence.
That's why I said an example. Would those be an example of empirical evidence? A historical text, writings, and personal experiences. Are those examples of empirical evidence?
Again, I posited that just because. So again, I just answered the question. I don't know why you're repeating yourself. That in some cases it can be corroborated as some form of evidence.
Alrighty.
Okay. You didn't answer my question, but thank you.
Alrighty. On the next one.
All right.
Alrighty. If anybody has Chris Claus's make sure to send the live to him, because I do know that he had a question.
Just hang on. I know like this isn't like the debate anymore, but like just so we're clear here, like let's just say John, for example, on the account, like how many people you believe is a contradiction with another account? So how many people in the Gospel of John were at the tomb according to the Gospel of John and what you understand?
Oh, wait, sorry, you asked me a question. I was focused on something else. Can you repeat that, please?
Yeah. How many people were at the tomb? Because you say they're all contradictory. How many people were at the tomb according to the Gospel of John? You say it's contradictory.
Mary Magdalene is the only one who's named in the Gospel of John, John 20 specifically, and she goes in whilst it's dark and finds the tombstone already rolled away, and then she runs to tell the disciples.
Yeah, so on the appearances, though, on the people, not the appearances, but the people that actually showed up to the tomb, why is Mary being the only one there contradictory with another one? Not the only one there, but the only one mentioned by Mary to be there contradictory with the other ones.
Again, as I said, the word of God, we'd expect it to be absolute detail. Again, I brought an example that said God breathed the word into existence, and so we'd expect it to have proper details. For example, you conveniently keep missing the earthquake point in that, a violent earthquake occurring and an angel who rolls back the stone. We'd expect these things to be written down in all of them and not just fleeced off as a minute detail that shouldn't be included.
So do you know what narrative criticism is?
Well, before we go on, So the way that we're gonna do this is I'm gonna let up a guest, and regardless if you have a question for one guest or not, I think that both parties should answer the question, just so it seems a little bit more fair, because I don't see many atheists in the box. All right.
That was very, very nice chat.
Just gonna go echo.
John says we. That's it. Go ahead.
All righty. What's your question, Mr. Echo?
Yo, it's for Train. So just a clarification, so you mentioned camera evidence, Train, when your opponent asked what evidence you would accept for the resurrection. So what evidence would you accept or be a qualified evidence for the resurrection if it took place in the 1st or 2nd century?
In fact, the camera evidence was actually something my opponent said when I asked him. And in the case of what evidence we'd expect then, as I said, it is very context dependent on what the motives are, which is, again, another point my opponent brought up. I did say that in the case that even someone does write something down, and even in the case that I posit that as some form of evidence, again, I posited that that's not sufficient evidence, and it doesn't actually act as hardcore evidence that something actually took place. I've repeated this multiple times over this whole debate. My opponent said that.
No.
Well, hang on. Just let me reply to it now. Echo, that was a great question. Again, if Capone brought up a very good question to him that demonstrated this dishonesty. He said, if George Washington existed, would we expect to see people writing it down? Like, this is more clearly what I was asking him. Will we expect to see people writing it down? So Echo, to your question, you would expect to see people writing it down. But notice on your question, his reply to that is to add these adjectives to it, that it's not hardcore evidence or that it's not sufficient evidence. What did I say at the very beginning? The most he's going to be able to say is that the evidence isn't enough for him to believe.
Exactly. But in my question,
hold on, Echo.
Hang on.
Okay, sorry.
Hang on. Echo. You got to ask the question and just let us reply. Usually, this is just a host thing.
God bless. He did strong on my question, but God bless.
God bless. So it is, in fact, evidence. It's just not enough evidence for him. He has these, ultimately, he has these dogmatic presuppositions of what extraordinary evidence is and what sufficient evidence is. That's fine. But the question is there evidence to support the resurrection? And what we'd expect to see? Well, we would expect to see people writing it down. We'd expect to see people, if it were certainly true, it certainly helps the case that your enemies also are saying that the person rose from the dead. That doesn't hurt the case. It certainly helps it, right? So if you have this consistency and people are actually willing to die for it, both the enemies and the believers, it adds to the validity that the thing actually happened. And again, the resurrection accounts aren't contradictory, but like you said, there's only so much you can do to try to explain it.
Yeah, alrighty. I actually do have an agnostic up here, so this is perfect. So, if you'll ever let me pause the time while he's connected. Oh, perfect. What's up, Curtis?
Nothing. I got a question.
Alrighty.
So A-Train brought up the earthquake argument. And I was curious if he could explain to me why, if there was an earthquake or whatever, how that's evidence that when they writ it down, or they didn't write it down and they talked about the gospel, how is that evidence that the gospel wasn't true?
Again, in that sense, I was bringing up an internal critique of the Gospels as well, in that I also brought up the 2 Timothy, God breathing into existence certain things, including the Word, and that if it's God's Word, there should be no contradictions, and that big events such as that should be, in multiple cases, if we look at even eyewitness testimony, events such as those that are that large would absolutely be in all of the cases, and the only positive explanation for why that would not be the case is that it's infactual and it's just riddled with myth as well. And we know this is true of the Gospels at large, but this is the exact issue which I've been bringing up to my opponent, which again has not been addressed. And again, there's a number of other contradictions as well.
and they've just been not addressed. So I don't really know what else you want me to say to that, but yeah.
All right, so yeah, I'll answer the question too. It doesn't demonstrate that the Gospels aren't reliable, which is just ridiculous. Again, if these complaints are answered by examining narrative criticism of the text, if these complaints are answered by again demonstrating that, hey, this doesn't contradict, even in the Gospel of John, he wants to harp on the stone, but even the Gospel of John, it says, we don't know where we've taken them. It only mentions Mary, but it said explicitly that she said, we don't know where she's taken them. Who are the other people with her? Again, they're employing telescoping. It's a historical practice of glossing over or compressing details so they can focus on their main point, as Capone brought up to you as an example for you to understand. This isn't hard to understand. You just have to want to understand it. Dan McClellan said that to me actually recently. This isn't hard to understand. You just have to want to understand it. If I say, my wife at the store with my daughter, I haven't lied. So the Gospels aren't lying. They're independent sources that are telescoping, which historians do all the time. These are Greek bios, lives of Jesus, that they're going to compress details of certain events. So to answer your question, it doesn't. It wouldn't demonstrate whatsoever that the Gospels are contradictory. And again, on the facts that we can know, we both agree on, for the most part anyway. We both agree on, and they get those from the Gospels and the early accounts. For the 1 Corinthians 15 creed, dated before the Gospels. So, yeah, that's the answer to your question.
Well, thank you. I just want to get A-Train's point of view on that a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I explained my point of view, and again, I brought out that my opponent is just trying to utilize circular reasoning as well as a number of other dishonest tactics to further validify his point, misconstruing the.
Alrighty, we don't need any poisoning. We don't need any poison in the well. Thank you for your question, Curtis. Let's move on to the next. Yes. Alrighty, let's. Who am I gonna pick? I'm just gonna pick him. He's at the top. Alrighty, Mr. Gabriel, how you doing today?
What's up, guys?
Alrighty,
This
go ahead with your question.
for A-Train. Yeah. So, given that you're not in an internal critique when you keep mentioning the Timothy verse of God breathed, right? Because that has its own context. It simply just means inspired. Why are you superimposing your subjective, arbitrary standard of what God breathed means and making that your argument?
No, I mean, in any case, you're going to be looking at the Gospels from a subjective standard, including you. I'm not sure if you know what subjective means or objective, but again, in any case, there's always going to be a subjective standard. And from what we understand about God's word and to be the infallible word of God, then it wouldn't really add up. There would be major contradictions, especially in such an pivotal and important part of the Christian faith that includes gospel accounts of them seeing the supposed risen Jesus. And so these contradictions do actually act as a
Thank you. So it is subjective. It is your subjective view. Thank you.
Hold on, Gabriel.
We can address that, Gabriel.
No, that's fine. That answered my question. I just wanted to know if it was his arbitrary standard. So thank you.
Alrighty, God bless.
Yeah.
Jay, you think you got an answer for that? If you could, I don't know if you can or not.
Well, I can't speak to, because this question was specifically like at A-Train. Why, like, it's just not your arbitrary standard. He did say it was his arbitrary standard. I would just add on that once again, this stuff isn't hard to understand. You just have to want to understand it. If that's the case, then there should be no reason we should stick to this idea that the Gospels are contradictory in any objective way, because it's just your arbitrary look at it. But it's everyone's arbitrary look at it. You're right, it's their opinion. But opinions, everything's opinion, but opinions can be guided by fact, and where we find truth is in what's most likely. We have to take an honest look at the text. Again, when we employ narrative criticism, when we employ context of the time, we see that these contradictions that he's brought up are not contradictions whatsoever. And again, this is not hard to understand. You just have to want to understand it.
Alrighty, sounds good. We can move on to the next guest. Who we got next? I'm not gonna lie, respectfully, P. Diddy, it's a terrible time to have your name out of the possibility that you're out of pocket. I can't bring you up. I'm sorry. So I know you've been patient, but I just can't bring myself to do it.
Oh, bro.
The possibility that you're out of pocket, I can't bring you up. I'm sorry. So I know you've been patient, but I just can't bring myself to do it.
Oh, bro.
There we go.
Okay, so my question is for A Train. A Train, the resurrection of Jesus was seen by different people at different times. How do you explain the hallucinations of different people, the same hallucinations at different times? And earlier in the debate, you had also said that you believe the crucifixion took place, which the historians use the Gospels as the source of that crucifixion. But then later on, how are you saying the very same Gospels are unreliable?
Again, and I brought them in different circumstances that we do have different evidence. We get from Jewish sources such as Josephus, Roman sources such as Tacitus, and I'm not saying every single part of it don't have not an actually verified source, but we need an external source of evidence to actually also corroborate these sources. And again, I'm mentioning it's the word of God, and there's actually internal inconsistencies in what we see as well. And so I can actually look at other parts. It's called an internal critique. I don't know if you've heard of it, but I can look at other parts and we can see the inconsistencies, and it does undermine your argument yet again. So again, there's no valid point that's been brought up. I'm sorry, but I've addressed this multiple times.
Okay,
Can you
no,
address
no
the
problem. It's
hallucinations,
a good
please?
question. Well, Jay, hang on. It's a good question, and he didn't answer the second part of it, which was the hallucination, which I have brought up, and I started smiling because I knew he was going to obfuscate it. The hallucination theory doesn't explain, to answer your question, it would not explain the group hallucination at different times. The group hallucination, and then the individual hallucinations
Where's
at
the
different
evidence?
times. So you have individual. So
Show
you
me the
have
evidence of that.
individual.
Hold on,
Just
hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. Like, he didn't interrupt you.
So you had your chance to answer this. So we have individual hallucinations, which explains an individual hallucination at different times by skeptics. Okay, for what reason? And then we have a group hallucination. So you believe the candle's burning at both ends. This mass hysteria explains the group hallucination, but then you have the individual hallucinations. You haven't really given a cogent answer as to how those two marry together. How in the world is that happening? And again, once again, this is widely rejected.
Right, and Josephus and Tacitus both believed in the crucifixion and resurrection. Someone needs to please check this guy. I have the words right here. So thank you very much. Thank you for allowing me to get 2 questions in. Cheers, everybody.
Of course, God bless. All right, so we got 30 seconds. So just because I don't want to end on a weird number, y'all gave up a lot of time. I'm gonna let one more person up, and let's just see what we got. A Train, pick a number between 1 and 7.
5.
All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Can you hear me?
Hello, Miss. Yeah, we can hear you, Mr. Ali. You got a question for him?
Yeah, real quick. A-Trade, question for you, my guy. So, in lieu of camera evidence, would it be good if we had a time machine you could go in and then see if Jesus died or not? Would that be better?
I'm sure an all-powerful God would be able to supply something like that.
Could possibly have some sort of evidence that would be able to convince everyone if God's so powerful. We know that he can do anything, but unfortunately we have nothing of the sort. And of course, the supernatural claims of God are not capable. And so I hope that will be the case. But unfortunately, God seems to not be able to do that. So.
All righty. And that's the end of his question. Jay, if you'd like to give your thoughts on it, go for it.
Yeah, a time machine would obviously be great. That's the straightforward answer to it. But in lieu of a time machine, we just have the knowable events of history, church history going back as far as we can trace it before the Gospels were written, saying that he in fact did rise from the dead, and people, unlike his claim that this happens all the time, it doesn't. People dying for something, both in apparently a mass hallucination and individual. I don't know how that works, but people dying for something that to their deathbed, skeptics and believers dying for something that they would have known to be a lie if they were lying about it. So if hallucinations all we got, then I feel pretty strongly in the evidence. But to answer the question directly, a time machine would be nice.
All righty, and that is basically the end of the debate. I thank everyone for stopping by. I appreciate both of you giving your all in this debate. Do we have anything we want to add before we go? Oh, and make sure everyone stay after for the debate after party, of course.
I mean, I'm not sure if I'll see if my opponent has anything to say, and then I don't know. I don't really think I have anything more to add. I think I've said everything I need to say, but
All right, Jay, you got anything?
so yeah, gonna have to go now because quite busy.
You know, I love you, A-Train. I believe you're made in the image of God. Just keep an open heart. Don't harden your heart, and you know, God will work wonders. If evidence is really what's holding you back, that'll be provided. But if not, and it's a heart issue, which it most likely is, just keep your heart open, and God will, you know, reveal that. Oh, he's gone. But